All right. Welcome to our group presentation. We are exploring the world of NIL opportunities in the NCAA. I'm Jacob Gideon. Along with us is Kiara Lewis, Stacie Morris, and DJ Wilson. So our NIL issue was the NCAA's recent approval to allow student athletes to receive compensation from endorsements for their name, image, and likeness has created far more questions than it has answers. The purpose of our research is to determine how NIL will impact college recruiting and create a possible solution to this problem. So the research question we're going based off of is, how will the recent approval for student athletes to receive compensation for their name, image, and likeness affect recruiting? In the past, student athletes have prioritized top-tier facilities, playing time, past program success, and even academia. Will that shift to who can offer the recruits the most money or the best job opportunities? So the practitioner questions that we wanted to find out, our first one is, will NIL help the powerhouse schools stay dominant, or will the power shift to schools whose alumni can offer the most money to recruits? Our second one is, will state income taxes affect high school recruits' decision on what school they want to attend? Third one is, will NIL development programs within athletic departments influence recruits' interest in certain schools? And then number four, will NIL cause the transfer portal to increase a great amount and affect program rosters? And then our last one is, will NIL alter the one and done stigma in NCAA basketball by incentivizing players to stay in school longer instead of chasing professional leagues money? So we'll pass it off to Kiara here for her first practitioner.
Hello. So I spoke with Steve Duzan, Senior Associate Athletic Director of Clemson University. So the first few things that he talked about was how student athletes, all Clemson student athletes, were required to attend an open doors lecture just to understand how you can get NIL opportunities and brand yourselves. He also then explained how all of the states weren't given equal NIL opportunities because they all didn't pass a bill for NIL. With South Carolina being one of the states that hadn't passed the bill for NIL, Steve explained how he couldn't really speak on behalf of student athletes about NIL opportunities. So student athletes could be missing out on opportunities just because he couldn't really speak for them. Um, he also talked about how the outlook for college athletes, the transfer portal, could rise even more. I know this past spring it was at its highest. He believes that it will grow even bigger. And he also spoke about one of the top prospects in high school right now, Mikey Williams, who already signed a huge deal with Puma, but he had to sacrifice prolonging his NBA dreams to stay in college longer. I then went on to talk to Corey Irvin, the assistant women's basketball coach at University of Illinois at Champaign, who was also my high school coach. So she spoke about how Illinois governor was the first to allow student athletes to be at the front for collegiate athletics, and how Illinois was given the opportunity to brand themselves right when NIL became, I guess I won't say legal, but everybody was given the opportunity to brand themselves. And she don't really believe that on the women's side that it will be a transfer portal spike just because of the opportunities that females are given as opposed to the men's side. Um, and I mean, she really talked about how she hasn't really experienced any recruiting yet on based on NIL opportunities.
All right, so the first practitioner that I talked to is Brandon Staley. He is a wide receiver coach at Evangel University, which is a Division II in Southwest Missouri. His first thought was that he didn't think that power will shift to the top for most sports. He believes that most powerhouse schools will stay as powerhouse schools because those Power 5 conferences have too much money to be knocked off. He also believes that schools that offer NIL development programs will have a bigger impact on recruiting than income taxes would, because NIL development programs provide a chance for recruits to make more money, and those services are able to promote them within the local community and get them more endorsements from local places. He also doesn't think that high school recruits would consider income taxes in their decision-making process unless they have an agent or a family member that can explain this to them when they're making their decision. He also said that the transfer portal has made a bigger impact right now on their program than NIL has. The two main reasons for that is because NIL is so new that they haven't really seen it play out over an actual off season. Since it was just put in right before the season started last year, he thinks that it's going to have more of an impact this year, but it's yet to be determined how much of an impact it will have compared to the transfer portal. And the second biggest point was because there's just such limited opportunities for athletes to profit at the Division II level. They're just not highly touted people. They don't have their face out there unless they're like a local athlete who's well known in the area. The second practitioner that I talked to is Riley Watkins. He's an offensive graduate assistant for the Arkansas Razorbacks football team. He believes that NIL will benefit schools in states that lack professional sports teams, such as Alabama or Arkansas, for example, because there's not because those local companies don't have professional athletes to endorse them, so they're going to have to rely on these bigger Division I schools athletes to be sponsors and endorsers. And according to Riley, NIL only applies to about 20% of their Arkansas football roster right now. He said it's very reserved for athletes that are already having success, so athletes that are doing well in sports right now on the field, or five-star recruits right out of high school. And then NIL development programs are not allowed to talk to recruits about specific dollar amounts or organizations before the recruit has committed or arrived on campus. So that was one of the biggest points he hit with me, was that these rules are already in place by the NCAA to slightly regulate what's already going on, and to keep it from being a recruitment tool right now.
Okay, so I kind of interviewed two different people who are in different parts of athletics department compared to other people we interviewed. Mitchell Prather is at University of Louisville. He's a strength and conditioning coach there. So for the first question, he believes that it's going to be a combination of the two. So powerhouse schools will stay dominant, or like the power shift of schools whose alumni can offer recruits the most money. He thinks both of those are going to be a factor. And obviously powerhouse schools have the most alumni who have the most money. So obviously the historical powerhouses will most likely stay in power. Our overall influencer will be the schools that provide the most market value. And obviously, depending on who alumni are at what schools, you never know. But for the most part, powerhouse schools will stay at the top. And then he goes kind of into the income tax, may only affect those recruits with agents. He kind of sees it as like sales tax or property tax, which athletes wouldn't pay. So unless they can get greater net value elsewhere, the states with no income tax obviously will have a higher recruiting advantage compared to those that do have income tax with that. And then he kind of goes into the one and done stigma within the NCAA, and he feels that in the past, the incentive to leave was basically ability to get paid more than they have, and obviously a trade-off was to forfeit basically a free higher education. However, high-profile athletes with the ability to do one and done can also get the best of both worlds now and not have to sacrifice one for the other. And then I also interviewed Will Frisbee. He's here at Clemson University. He's the assistant director of equipment for Olympic sports. He feels like it's going to be more common to see recruits make decisions on schools depending on the amount of money they can make. Obviously, powerhouse schools already have a large booster and alumni association, which aids in their success. But depending on what alumni are from where, smaller schools could start getting an advantage because alumni, maybe one powerful alumni could give more money to a smaller school to get a recruit that they want. Income tax issues will lead to an effect on recruits' decisions. Some big name recruits will take this into consideration. I think it is something that he believes is something that recruits will definitely start to think about, especially if they have agents. He believes that there'll be a lot more transfers within college athletics. NIL will create a large motivational factor for athletes to transfer within the Power 5 schools, and Power 5 schools will take advantage of it. And then, however, he does say the one and done stigma will go away, and high level athletes will be incentivized to stay.
Hey everyone, this is DJ. For my first practitioner, I interviewed Ryan Keene. He's one of my best friends. We went to the University of Miami together, and he is now a recruiting coordinator at Lynn University. They're a small D2 school in South Florida. And one of the big points that Ryan emphasized when we were discussing this topic to me was that he talked a lot about how he thinks NIL approval is going to really shift the resource balance throughout the NCAA. And what he meant by that was he focused on football and basketball in particular, the way you see a lot of the big name Power Five schools typically dominate the professional drafts. When it comes to student athletes turning professional, he said he thinks a lot of kids are going to start prioritizing smaller D1 or even potentially D2 schools if it means they have an opportunity to stay closer to home and still be considered, for their draft. And of course, to make compensation as well. And as a few of my group mates had touched on, he talked a lot about how financial advisors moving forward, their interactions with student athletes, one of the long-term effects of that is that it's really going to affect, recruiting opportunities for schools such as my current home state here of California, where our income taxes are just through the roof. That's going to have a large effect on, the bigger D1 schools out here, as opposed to, say a Georgia, Alabama, Clemson, anything like that. And a few of the other things that Ryan focused on when it came to how it would affect the transfer portal, he said that I think in the past, transfers have typically focused on how playing time would affect, their decision, whereas now, and this will actually come up again later in our proposed solutions, compensation is going to have a large effect on that as well, in terms of if a kid is going into, their fifth year in their sport, right, and they don't think they're going to have an opportunity to play their sport at the next level, they're going to say to themselves, what can I get out of my collegiate career, from a fiscal perspective, basically who can offer me the most money, and maybe that would have a large influence on where they go. So in terms of how that's going to look moving forward, regulating that. And he, again, being that he's at a small D2 school, he kind of tied that into how that would affect, their recruiting opportunities. And given that we both went to school in Florida, one particular student athlete we talked about was a kid named Donald De La Haye, who actually was a kicker for the University of Central Florida's football team. He went by the name Destroying on YouTube, and he actually ended up quitting the football team before NIL was approved because he had an opportunity to make so much money with his content on his YouTube channel that he just decided, hey, I'm probably not going to kick. I'm a 5'9" kid. I'm probably not going to kick in the NFL. Why would I want to pass on the opportunity to make money? Now that he is able to do that, it incentivizes kids to go to smaller schools that are still D1, like a UCF. And the other point that Ryan had made with NIL, in particular with the NBA, was, and again, this will come up in our proposed solutions, the concept of NIL passing, it incentivizes fringe NBA players, to stay in school for longer, right? A lot of those kids know that they have an opportunity, especially if they're a first round draft choice, to make millions of dollars, get a big signing bonus. Well, now, if they know how to market themselves properly and they're in a market where maybe they have an interest that they can, I don't want to use the word exploit, but use to their advantage in their community, they have an opportunity to make money while still playing, developing their game further at the collegiate level, and focusing on academia. So finally, when I asked Ryan, how is this going to affect you guys at Lynn in particular moving forward? Obviously being a small D2 school in South Florida, they have a lot of kids who come from overseas to play. They have a number of pretty large influence in Latin America and the Caribbean, as we do all throughout South Florida. But he just said it gives an opportunity for kids who are, because the South Florida market is huge for football and baseball in particular. And obviously small schools like Lynn or FAU or FIU, they lose all the big local recruits to schools like the University of Miami, the University of Florida, Florida State. So in a sense, this kind of puts smaller schools back in contention for potentially being able to get some of those kids to maybe consider a school that's close to home and you don't have the pressure of a D1. So that was my interview with Ryan. And then for my second interview, I interviewed another one of my very close friends, a kid named Adam Brunquill. He's the manager of game day promotions at Santa Clara University. Adam and I used to work together in athletic marketing at Stanford University, but he wanted an opportunity. He was a D2 college volleyball player in Wisconsin. So he left Stanford wanting an opportunity to work, high up in marketing for a smaller school. And he offered a really interesting perspective with that, because Santa Clara, they are D1. They're part of the West Coast Conference, but they are obviously not Power 5. So they don't typically get a lot of big name recruits. And if we do have bigger athletes in football or baseball or basketball here in Northern California, typically they're more likely to consider schools like Stanford or Cal, or if they want to go down south, like UCLA, USC. So Adams, a lot of his answers were actually pretty similar to Ryan in terms of how he thought NIL would affect, the smaller schools. And given that, Ryan's at a D2, Adams at a smaller D1, I wasn't completely surprised by that. I was happy to hear that they're both optimistic about what their odds are going to be, from a recruiting standpoint moving forward, not only with transfers, but even with high school kids, really putting them back in the market for being, a viable option for kids who, may never have looked at a school like that thinking, well, if I can't make money, why would I go to a school where I'm not going to have scouts coming out to my game because my team is terrible? So I think with Adam, the thing that really stuck out to me in particular, again, was the effect he thought it would have on one and done. Santa Clara men's basketball is actually having an exceptional season this year. And again, he was kind of focusing on, the effect it would have on allowing those kids to really make it through, sometimes 3, 4, maybe even 5 years of college, as opposed to leaving after 1 year, strictly sometimes for the opportunity to chase money. Now they have an opportunity to honor their scholarship because they are making money through a potential, endorsement deal, and, they can further their athletic skills while also focusing, on their scholastics. So the thing I will say that I found very interesting with Adam's answer is he said, and I was genuinely surprised by this. He said, I don't expect it's going to change the way we market any of our athletes here at Santa Clara. As I mentioned before, when you think of Bay Area college sports, it's Cal and it's Stanford. Typically, advertised in the community, the newspapers, the TV. Santa Clara is not really a big player in that. So the thing he focused on was, knowing that Santa Clara University is in the heart of Silicon Valley, driving distance from eBay, Google, Facebook, Twitter, all of that. He more talked about how it would be an opportunity for student athletes who know how to market themselves to move forward with that, as opposed to relying on, the athletic department at Santa Clara to market them a specific way and draw attention. He said more it's about lifting the sanctions with NIL that we've had in the past and allowing them, to move forward and market themselves as they see fit.
And so now we'll kind of move into our regulations that we're going to have in place as the NCAA governing body. Here are some of the university regulations. Number one, every university must establish an NIL department to promote their student athletes, record all of their endorsements and compensation, and to ensure that proper guidelines are being followed by all parties. So that would include the student athlete, the endorsing company, and the university. And so a big part of that NIL department is that if they don't have it, they need to be putting it in place. And then they need to be using that department to promote their student athletes. So like Riley Watkins said, whenever I talked about that, the 20% that Arkansas had that were already on endorsements, that 80% needs to be trying to get pushed by that NIL department to those local companies in order to try to get them endorsements as well and try to help them out as much as they can. And I think that creates opportunities for maybe sports marketing majors to now have kind of an internship with that program to try to get those athletes marketed and endorsed. And so the second one is that they must provide a free financial consultant service within the NIL department. So one of the bigger issues in professional sports right now is that players are going bankrupt within 2 to 3 years of being out of whatever league they were in. And so one of the ways we can try to prevent that is by offering them a free financial consultant. This consultant is obviously optional for those student athletes, but they can help them manage their money. They can help them invest their money, or just give them simple advice of how to spend it. And so it's a free service that the university would offer along with their NIL department. And so number 3, universities cannot offer a recruit endorsement deal unless that recruit has signed their letter of intent and committed to attending that university. And so the last one is the university endorsers cannot contact recruits that are not in the eligible recruiting class.
Yeah, so to kind of add on with that, we also, one of our proposed solutions, you know, obviously when we mention this, we're usually talking about how that would affect kids coming directly out of high school who are coming on, you know, as true freshmen. But from a transfer standpoint, we also were thinking that one solution would be to put a transfer cap limit of a max of 2 transfers in a student athlete's entire career, to, you know, mainly to ensure that they're not transferring simply to gain compensation. So with that in mind, we also propose, as we had mentioned, for kids coming straight out of high school, that transfers would not be allowed to receive a set amount of money until they actually commit with their transfer to their new school, you know, just to ensure that ethical standards remain intact, similar to that which we had proposed for high school recruits.
And so from there, we'll move on to the student athlete regulations. So the university has standards, and now the student athletes are going to have standards of what they can and can't do. So rule number 1 is that there's no limit to the amount of endorsements or compensation a student athlete can receive. Us as the NCAA, we are in charge of the university's athletic departments and the people on those university athletic departments payroll, which does not include the student athletes or the compensation that they're receiving from NIL. So we're going to take a laissez-faire approach to it, kind of like a government style. We're going to be fairly hands-off as long as they stay within our guidelines. So guideline number 2 for them is that their endorsements must be disclosed to the university NIL department so they can record the endorsement and how much they made in compensation, and it must be made available to the public so that other recruits can see it and see how much money they're making from certain places. The second one, or the third one, is that student athletes may use an agent to negotiate endorsement contracts on their behalf.
Yeah, so a big part of that, you know, with the shift in NIL, obviously agent interactions are going to become a necessary aspect of, you know, campus life and just collegiate athletics as a whole. So one thing that we were proposing with that is for student athletes to be able to hire an agent before the professional draft in their respective sport. And in our scenario, they would be able to retain their eligibility if they aren't happy with their draft selection in the draft, or if they even don't get drafted for that matter, they would be allowed to return to school and retain their eligibility, and still be able to hire an agent again, you know, in another season.
And so moving into number 4, student athletes cannot use their university's logo, mascot, or affiliation in any way with their endorsements, advertisements, or promotions. So they cannot in any way tie themselves to their university to be able to make money off of it. They've got to be separate from it. They're using purely their name, image, and likeness instead of the university's credentials. And then number 5 is that student athletes cannot be endorsed by companies that promote sex, drugs, or alcohol, or any related area that could embarrass their university or the NCAA in any way, just to maintain ethical standards also. And so now we kind of move into the consequences. So the failure for the university or the student athlete to comply with the NCAA NIL regulations can result in fines, probation, suspensions, vacation records, loss of scholarships, postseason bans, and in major cases, the death penalty for a program, depending on how serious the offenses are. And so a lot of these are similar to the punishments for recruiting violations because this kind of NIL starts to tie into recruiting. So a lot of the punishments are going to be the same. So then from there, we're moving to our references.